I like the dog. It's friendly.
Well, ho ho hello, and welcome back to my channel Box Office Poison. If you're new here, my name is Moxie McMurder, and before we get into the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to John and Veronica, who were kind enough to support me on Patreon and Ko-fi. I like to think of my Patreon as a digital tip jar, which is actually quite hard to say. Digital tip jar. There we go. I've only got one tier, and for just £3 a month, you can support this little corner of YouTube and get a shout out in my next video, along with access to blog posts, and in the new year, there will be some extra videos going up there too. Well, Christmas is right around the corner, and what better time for me to talk to you about one of my favourite horror films, that just happens to be a Christmas horror film. I'm of course talking about Bob Clark's festive slasher, Black Christmas. When it comes to horror that still manages to get under my skin, Black Christmas is still number one. Although I will admit that When a Stranger Calls from 1979, which plays with a similar format, also scares the hell out of me. I guess what I'm saying is that the idea of the calls are coming from inside the house is one that really unnerves me. When we talk about important game-changing horror, particularly from the 70s and early 80s, we talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. These films shook things up and established the directors, as well as creating tropes that horror films would happily stick to for decades to come. But before all these films came along, there was Black Christmas. And did you know that Halloween is in a strange way a sort of, kind of, if you squint a little bit, unofficial sequel to Black Christmas? We'll get to why later in the video, but for now, let me tell you about why Black Christmas is one of my favourite films. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. The original, that is. And come back to the video because there will be spoilers.
Ho, 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 shit.
So, 4 years before Halloween, we get this incredible, atmospheric, claustrophobic slasher that just so happens to be, if I may say so myself, feminist as fuck. It's also shot beautifully and is exactly what you want from 70s horror. The cosy aesthetics, the set design, the costumes, and the house where the majority of the film takes place, which is actually a real house and not a soundstage, is absolute perfection. Starring Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder and Keir Dullea, the film takes place over a couple of days at Christmas. The story itself concerns the girls at Pi Kappa Sigma, a sorority that's been receiving some creepy phone calls. The phone calls increase in severity, and when a young girl goes missing and is found murdered, the girls are convinced the two incidents are connected. Olivia Hussey plays Jess, Keir Dullea is her boyfriend Peter, and Margot Kidder is wild child Barb. The girls live in the sorority run by an older woman, Mrs. Mack, played by Marion Waldman, in a role that was offered to Bette Davis. Can you imagine? The girls have been receiving obscene phone calls from an anonymous man who they refer to as the Moaner. The Moaner is an obscene caller with a deeply unsettling voice, and what he says in these calls are, even by today's standards, pretty obscene and really, really strange. It catches you off guard and it just leaves you really creeped out. One of the girls in the sorority, Claire, is attacked in the house, and when her dad arrives after realising his daughter has gone missing, they go to the police, but they don't take their worries seriously. They're more interested in finding a young girl who's gone missing, and even though the girls are spooked about what's going on, they agree to join the search party to look for her. They have no idea that the killer is closer than they think. Films are often a reflection of the time they were made, and Black Christmas is no different. The rise in women's lib is probably the biggest societal change that impacted this film, And Black Christmas was ahead of its time by having female characters that weren't just fodder for the killer. These women have freedom, independence, and more importantly, agency, and that's very much part of the text. But of course, we can't have this conversation about Black Christmas without bringing up Halloween. Without Black Christmas, we wouldn't have Halloween. Or rather, I should say, we would have Halloween, but it wouldn't be what it is today. John Carpenter took the killer's POV-style shots and used them for Halloween. There's very little gore in both films, and both are set around a holiday. When a Stranger Calls was also inspired by Black Christmas, taking the phone calls coming from inside the house as the central idea, but it's Halloween that's credited as creating the slasher film as we know it today. Funnily enough, Bob Clark spoke about John Carpenter being inspired by Black Christmas.
Halloween pretty much was conceived as a sequel to Black Christmas.
He and John were working on a film that were about some murderous family from the Appalachian Mountains. That was a project that never got made. John
Carpenter had asked Bob Clark, are you going to make another Black Christmas? You know, that's one of my favorite films. And he said, no, I don't think I really want to. I want to go in different directions now. And John Carpenter said, well, you know, if you were going to make it, what would you, what would you do?
It'll be he was captured. After all, he was put in an institution. And the movie will begin the night he escapes back in town, and they don't know it yet, and I'm going to call it Halloween.
John Carpenter took that and ran with it, and of course Bob Clark was happy to let him go ahead and do his thing, so he added his own kind of spin to it.
He deserves the full expansive credit he's gotten for doing that movie. I mean, like I say, a few words about an idea are hardly a screenplay and a finished movie.
The film had some success in Canada, but it didn't really hit in America. But since then, the film has achieved cult status, and despite being made almost 50 years ago, it's still as fresh today as it was then. Whenever I watch Black Christmas, I'm reminded of just how progressive it is. Sure, there's an off-colour joke about rape at the beginning of the film, and I can't deny the inherent misogyny in one of the kills. Our girl Barb, the one who's the most sexually explicit and drinks like a pissed fish, is the one whose murder is the most violent. But there's also no sex or nudity in the film, which, for a horror film in the 70s about young women living in a sorority, is unusual and honestly a breath of fresh air. The women in the film feel like authentic women, and Jess, our final girl, is a brilliant character who I just love. She's calm, level-headed, and I don't think she actually cries once during this entire ordeal. Nor does she do anything typically stupid when it comes to her actions during the film. The only time that argument ever comes up is towards the end of the film, when the police tell Jess explicitly to put the phone down and leave the house. But poor Jess is damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. She's either stupid for not doing as she's told, or she's branded selfish and a coward for leaving her friends to find safety. It's at this moment in the film that Olivia tips ever so slightly into hysterical territory, but it's only for a few seconds, and she's able to regain her composure as she decides to take matters into her own hands. If this character had been a man, no one would question the decision to stay in the house. They'd be seen as a hero. Plus, she's armed. She doesn't just wander into the danger like some helpless lamb to the slaughter. And as you find out towards the end of the film, you shouldn't underestimate what she's capable of. And of course, there's the subject of Jess and her pregnancy. Earlier in the film, we see Jess tell her boyfriend she's pregnant and that she intends to have an abortion. Do you realise how rare it is to see a woman in film discuss the option of abortion? Even today, films shy away from the subject, despite the fact abortion is healthcare. And it's something a lot of women will have to consider at some stage in their life. Of course, Peter is furious that Jess would decide on her own to have an abortion without even discussing it with him. Peter's grand plan is to quit his music career. They should get married. But Jess has goals and ambitions, and she's not prepared to give that up. He says that them being married wouldn't change anything and she could still do anything she wants. But she makes it very clear she doesn't want to marry him, and he's outraged that she should make these decisions. I just think it's fascinating to see these conversations played out in film. It's so rare. And of course, these sorts of discussions gives it a big tick in the feminist box. Now let's talk about Billy. Billy is the moaner, the villain of the piece, and as far as I'm concerned, Billy is one of the scariest villains in horror. We never really get to see more than one eye as he hides in various places and whispering to himself. Billy speaks in different voices. One sounds like a woman, it could be his mother, who keeps asking what he did with the baby. He's constantly talking to Agnes, whoever she might be, possibly his sister. Perhaps Agnes was a baby. We get the impression that something sinister happened to Agnes, and whatever it was that happened is responsible for the crack in Billy's psyche. We don't know anything about Billy, and that's probably what adds the extra fear factor. We don't know why he's killing young women, we don't know anything, and we fear the unknown. And finally, that ending. It's the perfect, chilling end to a very creepy film. The lingering shot of Jess sleeping as the police leave to take Claire's father to the hospital, and the slow tracking shot through the house as the cheery Christmas lights are reflected in the pictures on the walls. And then we start to hear breathing, and the camera slowly pans up to the attic, because Billy is still in the house. This ending gives me chills every single time. Poor Jess is so vulnerable, and hearing the phone ring over the titles is the perfect way to have you walking away from the film carrying with you a real sense of dread. The decision to not only not reveal the killer, but to have him still on the loose while our heroine is knocked out cold is a bold move, and one that the Suits didn't want. They fought director Bob Clark and asked him many times to change the ending, but he refused, and I'm sure we can all agree he made the right call. I used to see complaints that Black Christmas is full of cliches, but this film created many of those cliches. The calls are coming from inside the house, the girl who disobeys the police only to find herself in more danger, the police are less than useless, and the suspicious boyfriend, all good old-fashioned horror cliches that Black Christmas is kind of responsible for and should be looked at in context. And I'm quite pleased to say that recently Black Christmas has seen a bit of a reappraisal in that respect. I'm surprised that a sequel for Black Christmas never appeared, although, as I said, we have Halloween. And also I like to pretend that the 2007 remake doesn't exist because it's terrible. But hey, that's just one woman's opinion. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year. Thank you for watching, happy holidays, and stay spooky.
I'm going to give the people what they want. Sensation, horror, shock. Send them out in the streets to tell their friends how wonderful it is to be scared to death.